My name's Nicholas Gruen. I'm the CEO of Lateral Economics, Chairman of the Australian Centre for Social Innovation and the Open Knowledge Foundation Australia. Yeah, so it was called Bitcoin, a public good privately provided. And in my ruminations on economic life, this is a big thing for me, that the sort of caricatured way that economists have encouraged people to think is that the world is made up of public goods and private goods, and public goods are provided by governments and private goods are provided by markets. That's nonsense. So the way we've been encouraged to think about the world by economists, and the way we do typically think about the world, is we think that the world is made of public goods and private goods. Private goods like cars and cookies are provided by the market, and public goods like roads and laws are provided by the government. That's a very crude, unsatisfactory understanding of public goods and private goods. If I'm running a football team, then there are public goods and private goods in the football team. Each of the individual players knows that they have a career that they're trying to attend to, but they know that that career will be built through attending to the public good of the team. So in every social organisation, there are public goods and private goods. It's one of the remarkable things about our species that we think in terms of the pronoun I and the pronoun we. Everything, an organisation, a family, a nation, the United Nations has private goods and public goods. There is what I call a fractal ecology of public and private goods throughout human life. And the other thing is that most of the most important public goods are emergent public goods. They come out of life itself. I'm currently using the English language to speak to you with. That is a public good. The government didn't build it. We built it ourselves. It emerged from life itself. Adam Smith, the founder of modern economics, wrote two big books. One is called The Wealth of Nations and is about private goods, and the other is called The Theory of Moral Sentiments, and it's about the rules and common understandings that are present in human life, and that turn a situation that could be a theatre for conflict and war and endless contest and fight into really remarkably harmonious cooperation. When I go to a shop or get into a taxi, we all know our roles. The shop's selling me something, I pay the money, I get my change. We don't argue about the price. If we did argue about the price, we'd do it in a civilised way. Far fewer than 1% of the people going into a shop try and steal from the shop. When I get out of a taxi, we don't have a big fight. We don't do any of those things. Those are all public goods, and the government helps to put people in jail if they violate social understandings too dramatically. But most of those understandings come from life itself. And another emergent public good is money. Money evolved in communities as a medium of exchange, as a unit of account, and governments came to the party late in the day, just as they do with the rule "thou shalt not kill," to help administer what is essentially a community understanding. Money is a community understanding, a social technology. It's not a thing. It's not gold. It's not coins. It's not notes. It's part of this social compact, the way in which a community has learned to operate in a cooperative fashion. Governments getting involved in money is a good thing, and it's also a bad thing. It's a good thing because money is the artery of the economy, the arteries of the economy, the blood supply of the economy, and the economy is subject to strong positive feedback. Just like a microphone held to it near a speaker generates feedback and goes out of control, markets are subject to bouts of euphoria and despair. And it makes sense for governments, firstly, to back currency and give it and make sure that it has something behind it, but more importantly, so that the money supply can be manipulated to dampen down the natural cycles of euphoria and despair. So in a macroeconomic sense, government involvement is welcome, although of course governments can screw things up, both because they're not perfectly motivated and also because we don't know perfectly exactly what to do all the time. But generally speaking, governments are part of the answer there, if they can be high quality governments. On the other hand, where Bitcoin comes in, where cryptocurrencies come in, is their incredibly efficient and decentralized ways for some monetary functions to take place, particularly transfers, particularly the process of exchange. And I see them, so I see that as a terrific thing to basically bring down margins in something like remittances. There are $500 billion of US dollars worth of remittances every year, and just a staggering $50 billion a year is taken out of the pay packets of some of the poorest workers in the world, certainly in the developed world, by the financial system, and we can get the financial system largely out of that using cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is could be a microeconomic miracle worker, and it could be a macroeconomic wrecking ball. So I don't look forward to the idea of Bitcoin displacing government-backed money. I look forward to the idea of Bitcoin supplementing government-backed money and disrupting and disintermediating the bloated fat ticks of the financial system. But I don't have a kind of millennial dream that we're going to take government out of the role of money provision because governments are the only thing we have. They are collective activity, and governments are needed to address what would otherwise be collective euphoria and collective despair, which will otherwise characterize the market, and always did characterize the market when we were subject to exogenous money, that is money from outside government, when we were operating according to the gold. So when you're in a gold standard world, when you are in a world in which the money supply is independent of government and independent of people, it's independent of the economic system, as the gold standard ideally is, then you basically got one hand tied behind your back, in maybe more than one hand tied behind your back, in trying to moderate the cycle, in trying to moderate the way in which, and we just watch this all the time, as property prices rise, more and more people come in and they go, you can't lose on property, and it's all bricks and mortar, and this property's price will one day be worth more than it is today, which is kind of logically true unless we go into massive deflation and then an asteroid hits us. So there are all these things that drive a boom, and then all of those things go into reverse and they drive a bust and despair. And that's very economically damaging. And money and moving the money supply up and down is the most powerful way to sedate that boom and bust cycle. And if we in some millennial dreaming, decide to try and do away with that, we will be doing ourselves a grave harm. But the central banks, their mandate is to deliver price stability, and subject to price stability to get us to as close to full employment as possible. So if they expand the money supply, which they've done massively, there isn't a problem so long as we know their mandate to deliver a stable currency remains intact, which it does. So if they flood the markets with money, there's no problem with that while inflation is low. And then if inflation starts picking up, they may well find they need to pull that liquidity out of the system. That's their role. That's the system working. It's not the system not working. Yes, the optimal level of inflation for an economy looks like it's probably about 2.5%, which is the inflation target for the Australian Reserve Bank, and somewhat more than the inflation target for most other reserve banks. So why do we say zero price inflation is best? Well, that's just some person's nice idea. I can tell you why 2.5% is optimal. You go and read some articles by a guy called George Akerlof, who showed that this enables adjustments in relative prices to happen much more easily within an economy than if you have zero inflation. It's psychologically very difficult to tell a whole bunch of workers in a factory, we've had a bad year, we're giving you a 1% pay cut. In a 2.5% per annum world, you say to them, good news, you're getting a 1.5% pay rise. That's a 1% pay cut. That's a real, in terms of real pay, their pay has gone down by 1%. That's the reason why we want to control the level of inflation. In a Bitcoin world, it is not the case you would have no inflation. You would probably, well, almost certainly, you would by definition end up having deflation in a Bitcoin world. Is that good? Well, most people seem to think it's bad, but it's important to have reasons for what you're saying, and simply saying zero is some optimal level because it makes me feel good isn't a very good reason. It's true that if you're in a world with governments that are sufficiently irresponsible, the gold standard will be a better standard than the alternative. If I lived in Zimbabwe, I'd be wanting to use something other than the Zimbabwean currency as my unit of exchange, as my means of exchange, and certainly as my store of value. We're not living in that world. We're living in a world in which we have come to some theoretical understanding of what money is. And money, what gold bugs are doing is they're making a mistake. They're looking at the gold and thinking that the gold is the money, and that is not the money. The money, or the currency, is if you like, and I'll use a provocative expression, it is a collective hallucination that we all agree to have. And we agree on a unit of account and a medium of exchange. And we want the most efficient medium of exchange that we can get. And who said that should be gold? It shouldn't be gold. It should be something that we've designed for the purpose. And the currencies of different countries were designed for that purpose domestically, and so was Bitcoin designed for that purpose. The fact that gold is capable of performing the role is an historical accident. And it is, in the words of Maynard Keynes, a barbarous relic of primitive thinking to think that there's something special about gold. It's that sitting in bank vaults, earning a higher rate of interest for the bank than the bank pays for it. So it's a method of subsidising banks to some extent. It's not, I mean, I don't want to argue either that this is the optimal way to behave, or that a simple manipulation of the money supply solves all our problems. We've known since Keynes talked about a liquidity trap that that's not the case. So we're in a liquidity trap. We keep handing over money and people can't find good things to spend it on, and it stays in the bank. So we've always known that that's theoretically a possibility, and we're now in a world in which it's much more than a theoretical possibility. It's actually happening. But again, we've had an experiment, as Paul Krugman keeps saying, we've had an experiment over the last 5 years with a whole bunch of different theories about how the economy works, and basic Keynesian ideas have passed the test with flying colours. All the other schools of thought have not. The other schools of thought were telling us that hyperinflation was just around the corner. Well, we're still waiting. It doesn't mean we won't have some inflationary challenges if and when economic activity picks up. There's a whole lot of money out there, and central bank's job will be to suck it back, suck that liquidity out of the system. But the system is behaving very much as it's described in Keynesian economics. The system is behaving very much as it's described in Keynesian economics, and Bitcoin isn't made to help you run the world in a Keynesian world. It's made to facilitate transactions, which it does very efficiently, and I'm thrilled that it's going to do that. But we shouldn't mistake it for something of greater significance than it is. It won't perform the macro role, and if we ask it to perform the macro role, it will perform it as badly as the gold standard did. Well, I don't want to defend that system. Milton Friedman, a right-winger, and lots of left-wingers have suggested full reserve banking in which private banks don't create money, and I think that's a much more effective and efficient world in both a microeconomic sense and a macroeconomic sense. But there's no contradiction in saying the government controls the money supply and banks create most of the money, because governments have various policy instruments, the cash rate and quantitative easing and so on, with which they manipulate the money creation of private banks. But I think private banks creating money is an inefficient system. And in fact, what I would liken it to is it's a bit like what we used to do with spectrum. We used to give it away. Now we auction spectrum, because spectrum for the phone system and the television system is a public resource, and so we can auction it and we can make lots of money, and it doesn't make the system, it's a form of taxation that is costless. It doesn't have an efficient, it doesn't change behaviour, and it doesn't cost the community anything. And we have money growth is a source of revenue to the government. If the government was responsible for money growth, it could tax us that much less because it's already got all this seigniorage. It makes very little seigniorage at the moment by just printing notes, because notes are a very small part of the money supply. And if the government created money growth entirely, it would give it a very, very substantial source of revenue with which it could lower taxes or expand expenditure. So I think that would be a good idea. Look, my advice to them is something similar to the advice Edmund Burke gave the French revolutionaries, which is he was quite sympathetic to the world they were trying to build, but he thought that they'd bitten off more than they could chew, and he prophesied the terror. He said, this isn't going to work. You can't smash everything up and expect something good to come out of it. We actually built this world that we live in over the last 200 or 300 years. We've made some mistakes. We've done some through mistakes. We've learnt to make things better. We're living in a world which we have struggled to create for hundreds of years. The idea that there's some magic key that that if you just sort of stop doing a few things, that there'll be this perfect order that will settle, is a very childish ideological delusion, in my opinion. And but that is not to say that Bitcoin isn't an exciting thing. It's a terrifically exciting thing. But we have to try and engage with it with working minds, not with magical thinking.
Look closely. What do we all have in common? No matter what corner of the world you live in, you need food, water, shelter, and money. Half of every transaction involves money in exchange for goods or services, stocks, a loaf of bread, illegal drugs. You gotta pay for it. We spend much of our lives chasing money to make a living and accomplish our dreams. But it's also an instrument of destruction. Some might say evil, driving criminals to lie, steal, and even murder.
The existing banking system extracts enormous value from society, and it is parasitic in nature.
Money is a catalyst for the worst and the best of human endeavor. Before civilization, we created currency, fuel for wars, the path to power, champion and enemy of innovation. Money is so integral to our society and our global economy that its true nature remains a mystery to most. This is the story of money, perhaps the end of money as we know it. No matter how fat your bank account or how thin your wallet, to us it's all cold hard cash. There are some who want to kill it. Get rid of it. Burn your dollars, your euros, your yen, and transform every penny you have into ones and zeros. Digital currency. Entrust it to the web and computers spread across the planet. Magic internet money. It's called cryptocurrency. Bitcoin. Invented in secret, it was a gift to the world.
It's not just a currency, but it's actually programmable money.
A potential curse on bankers.
And there's nothing that the big banks or politicians can do to stop it.
Breaking every government's grip on money supply.
What the internet did for information, Bitcoin is doing for money.
Could it be the new gold?
No, you have to really stretch your imagination to infer what the intrinsic value of Bitcoin is.
Regulators, the Federal Reserve, the banking system, at least understand this is a thing that they have to take seriously.
This is going to change the economic culture.
Bitcoin could be a microeconomic miracle worker, and it could be a macroeconomic wrecking ball.
Is Bitcoin the currency of the future? A godsend for criminals? Or a recipe for financial disaster? If you trust your money just as it is, we have a little story to share.